she's going to talk to us about delivering stroke care in New York City. So thank you very much, Emily.
Hi, can you all hear and see me? Okay.
Yes, we can.
I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Great. Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Chapman. I'm one of the sub-Is on the neurosurgery service right now. And today I'm excited to talk to you about some of the work I did this past year as a scholarly year fellow with the department under Dr. Mocco, focusing on how to meet stroke care needs in New York specifically for a variety of approaches, both at the epidemiological and also novel therapeutic level. So first I want to talk about my main project for the year, which was to get off the ground a clinical trial of silostazol in our Mount Sinai health system here. The genesis of this project was really sort of came out of my interest in how stroke care is conducted in countries around the world. And particularly in Japan, I was looking at how silostazol had been trialed to sort of great success for preventing secondary stroke recurrence in their populations there. So I saw that you know the drug had not been trialed for this indication in the U.S. and so thought it would be interesting to see whether these results would hold out in our New York City population. So first off, you know, looked at the literature, found this systematic review again done in all Asian countries, and what we found is that compared to placebo groups, also sort of this post-stroke treatment as usual groups, silostazol did significantly better in terms of decreasing recurrent ischemic and hemorrhagic strokes. That was promising. I then proceeded to do my own review of the literature. It's tricky because the trials are a bit heterogeneous in terms of design. Again, they're all done in countries outside of the US. Some of the trials were monotherapy versus mono, again, silostazol versus the current standard. Some of them were dual versus mono, so adding on silostazol. And I made sure to include studies that were adequately powered. And just to sort of summarize this here, first looking at silostazol's efficacy, at these shorter time points, 14 days, 6 months with these trials, we found sort of overall no significant differences in recurrent stroke. So again, silostazol patients didn't fare any worse. Then also looking at some of these bigger trials here, CSPS.com is out of Japan and Picasso is out of South Korea. We found is that when the time point was drawn out a bit longer, silostazol started to outpace aspirin for both mono and dual therapy. Also important, sort of to lay the foundation for this clinical trial to do here was to figure out what the safety profile was of silostazol. As I'm sure you all know, silostazol is currently FDA approved for peripheral arterial disease, but when it was when its bleeding effects was tested in healthy adults, first off here, they didn't find any significant differences on these parameters at both 3 and 7 days. Again, I looked at the trials that I found, and overall, this is sort of going through all the trials, but ultimately, there was a lower aggregate hemorrhagic event rate, and I found that the relative risk was actually significantly decreased when silostazol was used. Again, some heterogeneity in the study designs, but overall, the treatment groups tended to have either no significant difference or significantly lower rates of hemorrhagic events. So in summary here, just to quickly go through what I found, silostazol really seems to do better in terms of efficacy for both mono and dual therapies. And again, my review said lower relative risk, but just conservatively no difference in bleeding adverse events compared to the aspirin. So this was all very promising. Again, this is, the clinical trial obviously is a long process, but, Dr. Mocco and I, we were working also with the vascular neurology team here and speaking to them about getting patients recruited. Our objective is to have a multi-center randomized control trial in non-cardioembolic stroke patients here in New York City, here in the Mount Sinai Health System. The main sort of particular value added of this study again is to trial it in New York for the first time. So because of that, the study design is actually pretty similar to what had been done in other countries. Again, with the goal of seeing whether these findings will carry over to our populations here. So again, the treatment groups, we decided to go with dual and then mono versus mono as the control, looking at these specific stroke populations and seeing, in particular, that I think the value added could also be for patients who don't respond to treatment as usual in their post-stroke care. We're going to look specifically at ischemic stroke occurrence within a year, as well as these various secondary outcomes. And of course, one of the most important things is to really confirm that there aren't any increased rates of ICH or other fatal bleeding events in the dual therapy group. So obviously this clinical trial, I'm very excited about it. It's something that means a lot to me. I'm also at the same time, through my projects in stroke, recognize that these novel therapies are really, the second piece of this is to make sure that they are equitably and efficiently distributed. And that has a lot to do with the stroke delivery systems in New York City and in New York State as a whole. So to that end, I also conducted some epidemiological studies of our local regions. To give a little bit of background, there's been some major changes in the way that New York State has organized its stroke delivery in the past couple of years. Previously, the Department of Health was really the center organizing force, and it is still, but it's also now working with these certifying organizations or COs. These are private organizations like the Joint Commission that are basically tasked with surveying different stroke centers, seeing what their clinical resources and staffing are like, and if they meet the criteria for their checklists, are categorized according to these three categories here. Again, this is a very sort of New York specific inquiry that we're doing here. So this is sort of an interesting thing to study because again, there's been now this transition over the past couple of years, and as a result, throughout New York State, you have a patchwork of counties with certified centers and counties without. And previously, at the nationwide level, we saw we have in the literature that the certification by a CO is correlated with different degrees of socioeconomic status of the local population, financial resources, clinical resources. So we wanted to see if this held true here in New York State. We looked at all of the stroke centers that are currently listed by the DOH. We tried to see whether certification by a certifying organization was correlated with various social determinants of health. Again, we had two cohorts, counties that had at least one certified center by a CO and counties that lacked any certification. And we queried a bunch of different public databases, including Census, CDC, to look at these various social determinants of health, and also some very important stroke epistats. We did a between group comparison, and we also tried to see whether these covariates would predict whether a county had a certification by a CO. And what we found is that, first of all, only about a third of counties had at least one certified stroke center. But these certified counties tended to have a significantly higher median household income, a greater population density, a lower deprivation index, so they had less deprivation, they were less deprived, and also lower percentages of self-reported white race. And sort of most interestingly, even though what we found is that stroke incidence was pretty, there weren't really any significant differences of incidence across these different counties. When a county had a certified stroke center, again, only a third of these counties, they had significantly lower ischemic, hemorrhagic, and overall stroke mortality rates, and also higher average healthcare revenue. So again, similar incidences, but then you start the certified center counties tend to come out ahead in terms of mortality rates. These are some heat maps that are just illustrating my points here. In panel A, you see a higher concentration of certified centers in the metropolitan areas and also Long Island. And then in in B, you see that there's a more sort of evenly distributed incidence rate. But in C, you see that in panel C, you see that in the western and northern parts of the state, really a higher mortality rate concentration there. This map also reiterates my point about certified counties in the metropolitan land areas, but at the same time, and that really correlating with greater healthcare revenue, sort of a healthcare spending GDP type figure. So overall, fewer stroke centers, only a minority of stroke centers have been CO certified. The non-certified counties had poor social determinants of health. And again, these non-certified counties had higher stroke mortality despite comparable incidents. And another sort of significant way that certified counties differed was that they tend to have higher county healthcare revenues. So overall, what this study was finding is that there continues to be disparities in access to stroke care. They tend to follow along lines of socioeconomic status. So to sort of wrap this all up, it's the importance of correlating these new therapies as well as how we're going to actually get these new therapies to different populations throughout the state, pending sort of local resources and local healthcare delivery systems. I think these are sort of very different aspects of stroke care that need to all come together. And so, this is something that I studied this year and that I found really, really worth looking into. So that sort of wraps up my talk for today. And, I wanted to acknowledge Dr. Mocco for being my mentor this past year. I wanted to acknowledge Dr. Howe, who's working with us from vascular neurology, residents Kurt and Trevor for their guidance and feedback on these projects, some great students listed here. And lastly, I want to thank the Department of Neurosurgery for supporting my research and also giving me this opportunity to present during my sub-I. Thank you so much. I'll take any questions.
Great job, Emily.
Great job, Emily. Really great job. I think you showed that you've covered a breadth of clinical research, learning how to design the fundamentals of a trial, how to apply them to trial evaluation and practical execution, and analyzing large data sets in a meaningful way. I saw your transition from being a researcher that just sort of fished through the data to someone who had real hypothesis generated work. And I think the presentation represents that. Excellent job, and it's going to serve you well as you go to your sub-Is and everywhere else. Well done.
Thank you so much, Mocco.
Hey, Emily, great job.
Just
wanted to thanks, Kurt. Just wanted to just ask, so what would be your next step? Where do you want to take this research, looking at the social determinants, of health and the presence of comprehensive stroke centers in New York, and what's the next step in terms of where you see this research going?
Yes, so this is a very challenging, a big challenge. And so this was sort of something that I've been working on with this pipeline program that I mentioned previously. But the goal is to expedite the certification process for counties throughout the state. So basically, while there needs to be a big increase in financial resources, which is something that I need to figure out more steps in terms of working with the Department of Health. I think what I'm working on right now is trying to see whether it's sort of increasing the transparency of what even is on that checklist, right? So like how can a hospital see what the Joint Commission is requiring to get certified as, let's say, a primary stroke center, and how can they quickly see, okay, we currently have XYZ on the checklist, we're still missing, these other ones, and how to expedite that information transparency. That's sort of my first step, because it seems, from what my understanding right now, is that in places in metropolitan areas, there's a lot of access to that kind of, the TJC is coming, we need to improve our guidelines to get certified. But in other especially more rural parts of the county, that the access to information, even the access is just not there. So that would be my next step before the necessary financial resources coming in to bring on more neurosurgical staff to other more remote hospitals.
Emily, fantastic talk, really good work. I have a question for you, which may also be a question for Jay and Chris. I read an article saying that the Joint Commission, maybe some of you are not aware, Joint Commission is, in a way, a service for which hospitals subscribe to for certification. It's one of other ways of certifying care. It's not like the mandated way. So the article I read said that Joint Commission, in its determination of stroke centers or other centers of excellence, often has bias, and the bias may be related to what we call CMS, which is Medicare guidelines and so forth. Have you come across, or did you see anything in your work that shows, like Joint Commission being consistent throughout in terms of these designation of these stroke centers? Because I'll tell you why. I'm sorry if that's a complicated question. The reason that it's relevant is that a lot of smaller hospitals are saying that Joint Commission favors larger academic centers and is biased. So I don't know if you saw any of that either. Either you or Jay or Chris.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. I think that's a little bit outside of the can of what she evaluated, but I don't think that there's a reality there. The truth is that Joint Commission has a budget to make, just like all of them. And by the way, many of the competitors in accreditation, for instance, DNV, are actually for-profit companies, whereas Joint Commission is not. It's not for profit. But they do have to keep the doors open, keep the lights working. So they are always looking to expand access and increase the number of people who are participating. I don't think that there's a bias. I would say that small hospitals complaining that the bias is that you have to meet certain requirements, and therefore, to be a center of excellence, you have to designate that you have appropriate nurse staffing, appropriate education, and everything else. And I think that's the limitation. That's the issue. I don't think there's a bias away from that. In fact, I think if anything, and I just wrote an editorial in JNIS on this, if anything, there's a bias to a lowest common denominator to try to get more centers certified.
Can I make a comment on the scholarly year? It's a big decision for a medical student to commit to an entire extra year to enhance their abilities as a researcher in neurosurgery. And I think, this one has paid off. You had to put a whole lot of thought and effort, and this does not come even with an intensive experience, working 100 hours a week. You just can't get that in a couple of months. So for those of you who are still contemplating a career in neurosurgery, it's a hard decision to make because you do add a year, but I think the depth of skills that one can get with a full commitment like this, you could see in the quality of Emily's work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dyson.
Thanks very much.